What if the person running from you isn't running from love, but from the weight of their own unhealed story? What if their distance isn't rejection, but protection? And what if the real reason they pull away is the very proof that your love has touched something sacred inside them? Deep love is one of the most beautiful and terrifying forces on earth. When it enters someone's life, it doesn't just bring joy, it brings exposure. It shines a light into the darkest corners of our soul, into places we've spent years, sometimes decades, trying to hide. For those who carry an avoidant pattern, this intensity doesn't feel like a gift at first. It feels like a threat. Not because they don't want it, not because they don't need it, but because somewhere along the way, love became associated with loss, suffocation, or pain. The real reason avoidants run from deep love is because deep love is the mirror that reveals their deepest fear. To be fully seen and still abandoned, to be fully embraced and still lose themselves. That fear is ancient. It's not about you. It was carved into them long before you arrived. And when you touch that place with genuine love, their survival brain kicks in and says, retreat, protect, hide. But here's the paradox. The very act of running proves that love has penetrated the walls they swore no one could cross. Think about that. They only retreat because you've touched a nerve, awakened a truth, rattled the armor. If your love had no weight, there'd be no reaction. So the running isn't proof of rejection. It's proof of impact. Now, what do we do with that? We stop making it about us. We stop collapsing into the story that we're not enough, that we've been rejected, that their walls are a final answer. Instead, we rise into purpose. Real love is not about control. It's about space. It's not about forcing someone to stay. It's about creating an atmosphere where staying becomes a free choice, not a forced one. You see, every human soul is driven by two primal needs, the need for certainty and the need for freedom. Avoidants cling to freedom because certainty once hurt them. Deep love threatens the balance. It feels like a cage, even when it isn't. But the truth is, when you create a love that honors freedom, that respects space, that allows them to breathe, you invite them back in. Not because you begged, but because you embodied strength. The divine principle here is simple. Love is not possession. Love is permission. When you release the grip, when you trust that what is meant for you will not escape, you give the avoidant something they've never known, safety and closeness. That is when the walls begin to soften, not because you forced them down, but because they chose to lower them. And isn't that the essence of deep love? To not only connect, but to heal. To not only receive affection, but to create transformation. The real reason avoidants run is the same reason they one day return. Because the love they feared is the very love their soul was searching for. Avoidants don't fear love itself. They fear the vulnerability love demands. That truth changes everything when you really let it sink in. Love, at its core, requires us to open, to let another person see behind the armor, to expose the rawest parts of our being. For someone who has built their entire sense of safety on control, distance, and independence, that kind of exposure feels unbearable. It's not that they don't crave closeness. Deep down, they often long for it as much as anyone. But the very act of lowering their guard feels like walking into a battlefield unarmed. They've been taught, whether through experience or unspoken lessons in childhood, that vulnerability equals danger. So when real love shows up and it's powerful, consuming, and real, it doesn't register as a gift. It registers as a risk. Think about it. When you truly love, you give someone the power to hurt you. You give them the keys to your heart, trusting they won't shatter it. For an avoidant, that handover of trust isn't a natural step. It feels like putting themselves in the same position where they've once been left, rejected, or controlled. So when love invites them closer, they instinctively flinch. Not because the love is wrong, but because vulnerability activates old programming. It whispers to them, if you let them see you, you will lose yourself. If you open up, you'll be hurt. If you depend on this, it will eventually be taken away. And that voice is so loud, it drowns out the yearning they feel in their heart. This is why you'll often see an avoidant give mixed signals. They come close, they lean in, they taste the sweetness of connection, but then something in them panics. The intimacy feels too deep, the wall's too thin, and they retreat. They're not rejecting the love, they're rejecting the terror of exposure ability. To them is like standing naked in a storm, praying the wind won't tear them apart. And so they run, not away from you, but away from the unbearable sensation of being that unprotected. It's easy to mistake this for coldness or to think they're incapable of love. But that's not the truth. The truth is their fear of vulnerability is the strongest evidence that they do feel deeply. If they didn't care, there'd be no fear. If love meant nothing, they could walk in and out without flinching. The presence of fear shows the stakes are high. They withdraw because something in them knows. This is real, this could matter, this could break me wide open. Vulnerability is not a weakness, but for the avoidant, it feels like the one thing that could unravel their carefully constructed identity. That's the paradox. The closer love gets, the more dangerous it feels. The very intimacy they crave is the very intimacy they run from. It's not love they fear, it's what love demands. the courage to be exposed, the bravery to let go of control, and the terrifying possibility that opening their heart could mean it might break again. Deep intimacy awakens buried childhood wounds of rejection, abandonment, or engulfment, and this is where the avoidance struggle really begins. When someone loves them deeply, it's not just affection or connection they feel, it's as if the very presence of that love triggers a memory their nervous system never forgot. These wounds often come from moments so early in life that they might not even remember them consciously, but the body remembers, the nervous system remembers. That's why, when intimacy begins to deepen, something primal stirs inside them. It's not the partner they're afraid of, it's the echo of what intimacy once cost them. For many avoidants, closeness once meant pain. It might have been a parent who was inconsistent, warm one moment and cold the next. It might have been love that felt conditional, offered only when they behaved or achieved a certain way. It might have been engulfment, where their needs were ignored and they were forced to merge with the emotions of a caregiver who didn't leave space for their individuality. These early experiences carved deep grooves into the psyche. They taught the child that closeness is never safe, that love always comes with a catch, and that being too vulnerable risks either losing themselves or being left behind. So when adult intimacy starts to mirror that level of closeness, their nervous system rings the alarm. Their partner may be offering love in its purest form, but inside, the avoidant feels something entirely different. They feel the same terror of abandonment they once felt as a child when love was withdrawn. They feel the same suffocation they once felt when their boundaries weren't honored. They feel the same devastation they once felt when emotional needs were minimized. And because the wound is so raw, their instinct is to protect themselves at all costs. To them, running or shutting down doesn't feel like a betrayal. It feels like survival. This is why avoidants often say they don't know why they pull away, that it just happens. They may not consciously connect the dots, but their subconscious mind is working overtime. The adult relationship becomes a stage where the unhealed child inside them plays out the same fears again and again. Intimacy becomes a mirror reflecting those old wounds, forcing them to confront feelings they've spent their whole life avoiding. The irony is that deep love is also the very thing capable of healing those wounds. Yet to the avoidant, stepping into it feels like walking into fire. They're caught between the hunger for connection and the terror of reliving old pain. That's why many of their behaviors look contradictory. They may long for closeness, yet sabotage it. They may crave reassurance, yet reject it when it's given. The conflict isn't with their partner, it's with their own history. Every moment of deep intimacy becomes both a trigger and an invitation, a trigger of unresolved wounds and an invitation to finally face them. But until the avoidant recognizes what's happening, the instinctive reaction is to run, because staying feels like reliving the very heartbreak they swore they'd never endure again. Their instinct to pull away is a survival strategy, not a lack of feelings. This is one of the most misunderstood truths about avoidance. When they withdraw, when they shut down, when they create distance, it's easy to believe they don't care. But beneath the surface, their behavior is not about a lack of love, it's about a learned method of protection. At some point in their life, they discovered that when things became emotionally intense, the safest way to cope was to retreat inward, to detach, to make themselves untouchable. That instinct became ingrained not as a conscious choice, but as a deeply wired survival response. Think of it like this: just as some people fight when threatened and others freeze, avoidants flee. Their nervous system has been conditioned to equate closeness with danger. So when intimacy becomes too real, too vulnerable, too consuming, they don't ask themselves, should I run? Their body simply reacts. Pulling away isn't them deciding you're unworthy. It's their survival brain screaming, this is too much, protect yourself. And in that moment, retreat feels like the only option. What makes this so complex is that the avoidant often doesn't even understand why they're doing it. On the outside, it might look cold, dismissive, or uncaring. But on the inside, they are fighting a storm. Their heart may want connection, but their survival instincts want safety. And to them, safety means distance. That's why they often feel conflicted. They may love deeply, but the intensity of that love activates the very alarm system they've relied on for years. The closer they get to what they truly desire, the louder the instinct to escape becomes. This is where so many relationships with avoidance break down. Their partner feels hurt by the withdrawal and assumes it reflects indifference. They interpret the silence or the distance as rejection. But in reality, it's the opposite. The retreat is evidence of the depth of feeling. They wouldn't need to pull away if the bond had no weight. The survival system is only triggered because the love matters, because the closeness has meaning. That's the paradox. The stronger the love, the stronger the instinct to run. It's important to see this not as cruelty, but as conditioning. Just as a soldier trained in combat reacts automatically to gunfire, an avoidant reacts automatically to intimacy. The strategy worked once. It kept them from feeling the unbearable pain of rejection, engulfment, or loss. But now in adulthood, the same strategy prevents them from receiving the very love they long for. The instinct is outdated, but it still feels necessary. So when they withdraw, it's not about shutting you out, it's about protecting themselves from a threat their nervous system can't yet distinguish as love. It's a reflex, not a verdict. Understanding this changes the way we interpret their actions. Instead of seeing distance as the absence of feeling, we can see it for what it truly is, a survival mechanism, an old shield rising up against a fear that love has reawakened. True connection requires breaking the cycle of fear with safety, patience, and self-awareness. Without these three elements, love with an avoidant easily becomes a cycle of pursuit and withdrawal, one partner craving closeness while the other retreats, both misinterpreting the other's actions. But when you begin to see the deeper reality, that avoidants are not running from you but from their own fears, you realize that forcing intimacy or demanding immediate vulnerability only strengthens their instinct to escape. The path forward is not pressure but presence. Safety is the first and most essential ingredient. Avoidants have lived with the belief that closeness equals danger, that love demands they surrender control or lose themselves. To rewrite that belief, they need to experience a kind of connection that doesn't demand, doesn't suffocate, doesn't trap. Safety is created when love is offered without strings attached, when space is honored, when words and actions prove over time that closeness won't be punished and distance won't mean abandonment. It's not about convincing them with logic, it's about showing them through consistency that intimacy can be safe. Every calm response when they retreat, every respectful boundary you hold, every moment you remain grounded instead of reactive, these are signals to their nervous system that this time love doesn't equal danger. Patience is the second element because transformation doesn't happen overnight. You cannot undo decades of protective conditioning with a single conversation or a single act of reassurance. The avoidance walls didn't go up in a day, and they won't come down in a day either. Patience means understanding that progress may look an even 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It means staying steady even when their instinct is to withdraw, trusting that each cycle of retreat and return is an opportunity for growth. Without patience, the relationship easily devolves into frustration, accusations, or ultimatums, none of which create the safety needed for healing. With patience, however, the avoidant slowly learns that love can remain steady even when they falter. That consistency becomes the antidote to their fear. And then there is self-awareness. This is the piece often overlooked, yet it's the one that shifts everything. If you don't understand your own patterns, your own triggers, you will take their withdrawal personally. You will believe their distance means you're not enough. You will chase harder, react stronger, or shut down yourself. But with self-awareness, you begin to see the bigger picture. You recognize your own wounds that are activated in the dance. And instead of reacting, you respond with strength. You stop making their fear your identity. Self-awareness empowers you to create a dynamic where love is not tangled in blame, but rooted in growth. When safety, patience, and self-awareness come together, a new cycle begins to form. Instead of pursuit and withdrawal, the relationship begins to move toward trust and openness. The avoidant slowly realizes that they no longer need to run because the love they once feared has proven itself to be steady, spacious, and real. This is where true connection begins, not in forcing walls down, but in creating an environment where walls naturally no longer feel necessary. Love that endures isn't about forcing closeness, but creating space where the avoidant feels free to choose it. That truth is often the hardest to embrace because human instinct, when faced with distance, is to close the gap. We chase, we demand, we plead, because closeness feels like proof of love. But what if the greatest proof of love isn't how tightly we hold on, but how willing we are to loosen our grip? For an avoidant, nothing suffocates faster than the sense of being trapped, of having their autonomy stripped away. When love becomes a cage, even if it's a beautiful cage, their instinct is to escape. But when love becomes an open field, inviting, safe, and free, they are far more likely to stay, not because they have to, but because they want to. This shift in perspective changes the entire dynamic. To love an avoidant is to understand that closeness can't be demanded, it must be chosen. The moment it feels like a requirement, their alarm system is triggered. But when love is offered as a space where they can breathe, when their independence is not threatened but respected, they begin to experience intimacy in a way that doesn't rob them of their identity. Freedom becomes the doorway to closeness. Paradoxically, the more you release the need to control, the more space you create for connection. Creating that space doesn't mean detachment or emotional coldness. It doesn't mean abandoning your own needs. It means shifting the energy from force to invitation. Instead of saying, you need to open up to me, the posture becomes, I am here, I am steady, I am safe, and when you're ready, I'll meet you. That stance allows the avoidant to lower their guard willingly because they no longer feel cornered. They discover that intimacy doesn't have to equal loss of freedom. It can coexist with individuality, with space, with autonomy. At the heart of this principle is respect. Respect for their process, respect for their timing, and respect for their inner world. When someone feels respected, they feel safe. When they feel safe, they can soften. Love that endures knows how to balance the desire for closeness with the wisdom to honor distance. It learns how to hold the tension between longing and letting go, between togetherness and space. That balance is not weakness, it's strength. It takes a deep confidence to say, I don't need to grip you tightly to know you'll stay. And here's the beauty. When an avoidant chooses closeness of their own free will, it carries a depth of meaning unlike anything else, because they are not entering intimacy out of obligation, fear, or guilt. They are choosing it because love has created an environment where they finally feel safe enough to step in. That's the kind of connection that lasts, not forced, not coerced, but freely given. It is the kind of love that endures because it is rooted not in control, but in freedom. Thank you for giving your heart and energy to this message. Your growth is the reason these words exist. Goodbye for now, and remember, true love is freedom, and freedom always leads you back to love.